And joining us now on the debate, in Durham, North Carolina, Laurent Dubois, professor of history at Duke University. In Hartford, Connecticut, Alex Dupuis, professor of sociology at Wesleyan University. In New York, New York, Jonathan Papoulides, senior policy advisor with World Vision. In our nation's capital, Stephen Baragni, professor of international studies at the University of Ottawa. And here in our studios, Kevin Edmonds, graduate student at McMaster University's Globalization Institute. I thank everybody for joining us on the line from the States, from our capital, and here in Toronto. Kevin, nice to meet you as well. Let's start by going through a few things here, because we're a year to the anniversary, rather. Map first, if we can, Michael. Haiti shares an island, the island of Hispaniola, with two countries that perhaps couldn't be more dissimilar. Haiti and the Dominican Republic. There's the capital, Port-au-Prince. And here's a brief fact file, because yes, indeed, the quake struck a year ago tomorrow at 4:53 in the afternoon, a 7.0 on the Richter scale, hitting just 10 miles west of Port-au-Prince and its 2 million inhabitants. 3 million people were in need of emergency aid after the earthquake struck. And one thing we learned, Haiti has no construction standards, unlike other countries which have a history of earthquakes, and so buildings were utterly incapable of withstanding the shaking. Later tonight, we should say, right after this program finishes, we are going to have the world premiere of part 1 of a documentary series called Inside Disaster Haiti. We hope you'll stick around for that after this broadcast is over. In the meantime, let's give you a little snippet of that documentary. Michael, roll tape, please. And finally, just before we get to our guests, this excerpt from Foreign Policy magazine from last week. Haiti marks a grim anniversary this month. It's been 1 year since a catastrophic earthquake struck the island nation, leveling whole neighborhoods of the capital city of Port-au-Prince and killing upwards of 230,000 people. 12 months later, much of the rebuilding and recovery remains undone. Only 40% of the rubble in Port-au-Prince is scheduled to be cleared by next August, complained former U.S. President Bill Clinton, the United Nations Special Envoy to Haiti, at a recent meeting of the Interim Haiti Recovery Commission. Let me get, because you're all experts in this area, let me get your sense 1 year later of how Haiti is doing. Alex Dupuis, let me start with you. How's Haiti doing 1 year later?
Well, as you just mentioned, the recovery process has not been really started. Even though there has been money sent to Haiti, so far the Interim Haiti Recovery Commission has not gotten off the ground with the projects that they've identified to start rebuilding Haiti. So it's not doing as was expected, and many people are still faring rather poorly, still living in a tent in the camps and houses. People are still out of job. The economy is in shambles. So overall, it's not doing well.
Okay, Kevin Edmonds, you were there a couple of months ago. Went down and saw things firsthand. What can you tell us?
From what I experienced and what I saw, it looked like the earthquake happened, yesterday.
Really?
There was rubble all over the streets. People are in the camps, but they don't have access to services. That was about 9 or 10 months after the earthquake hit when I was down there. There's plans for reconstruction that are going forth, but they're looking to implement policies that have already shown to not work in Haiti. So people are getting frustrated that there's going to be a reapplication of failed policies, and I heard a lot of people in the camps expressing that to me.
Jonathan Papoulides, your organization, World Vision, of course, has been down there ever since. What can you tell us about how Haiti's doing a year later?
Thank you, Steve. Well, first of all, World Vision has been in Haiti for 30 years, and we understand that even before the earthquake, it was a very fragile place, especially for children, which make up for half the population. There was an acute emergency phase right after the earthquake where people needed direct life-saving support. And following that, we should be gradually moving into something called recovery. Now, at the first year mark here, we have to, as a community, decide whether that's going to mean rebuilding what was there before, the status quo. So it's basically an earthquake response, or it's going to mean helping to transform Haiti into a country that has healthcare, that has a thriving education system, that has access for all to these public services, to jobs in the economy. Now we see that the Commission has a lot of potential to make this a more transformative type of response for the long term, and that's something that World Vision is very much behind. But at this moment in time, that potential remains untapped, and we see an overemphasis on projects and not enough on progressive policies that bring stakeholders in the government and communities together, and that's where we really have to go.
Okay, and thank you for correcting me, Jonathan. I didn't mean to suggest in my opening that you'd only been there for the past year. Of course, World Vision's been there for a few decades. I guess the public's awareness of it has certainly been much more keen over the past year, however, is I guess what I should have said. Laurent Dubois, give us your sense of how things are 1 year later.
Well, obviously there's tremendous difficulties. I mean, I do think the magnitude of both the catastrophe and the difficulties that were there before suggest that this is going to be a really long-term project. I would say perhaps as disappointing in a way about the lack of progress is I don't think that, as others have said, that the kind of fundamental rethinking or creativity about thinking differently about Haiti has happened. I think there was a lot of expectation that in the wake of the earthquake there would be a real kind of shake-up in how we think about the policies towards Haiti. And in some ways we see things coming back together in the way they were before, and I think that's as much of a problem as any other.
And Stephen Barani, give us your take just finally in this opening round here of questions.
Sure. I agree with much that has been said by my colleagues. Perhaps 3 points of nuance. First, although the humanitarian assistance that has been delivered so far falls far short of the needs of people on the ground, one really should note that hundreds of thousands of people have been relocated into temporary shelters. More have been provided with potable water and other basic life-sustaining assets and so on and so forth. So actually a lot of humanitarian assistance has been delivered over the past year. Secondly, the country is in a political crisis. The fiasco over the first round of election in late November and the difficulties in finding a way out of that impasse since, although perhaps things might be getting clearer this week, is another major development.
And the third thing?
And the third thing is that I completely agree with those who have said that we have seen very little action with regards to the rebuilding better, or in French, refondation side of the vision for reconstruction that emerged in the months following the earthquake, and that was codified in the action plan tabled in New York in March.
Okay, let's pick up on a number of these things here. First of all, you talked about humanitarian assistance off the top, and Alex Dupuy, let me go to you first on that. NPR in the United States has been reporting that of the $10 billion pledged after the earthquake took place, only $1 billion has actually arrived in Haiti. Do you know why that is?
Well, I think there's a distinction that needs to be made between private donations to non-governmental organizations and the money pledged by foreign governments for the rebuilding of Haiti. Many countries in March 31st of 2010 made pledges of around $10 billion to rebuild Haiti, but very little of that has actually been delivered, and it's probably because governments usually don't necessarily cough up the money they promise because they have other priorities, and Haiti, once it's off the airwaves and so to speak, falls rather low on their priority. But of the money that has been delivered, as I mentioned before, very little of it has been spent, and that has to do with, I think, the inability of the IHRC to really identify and target key priorities to start the process of reconstruction. But also, I must add that what they have in mind is not necessarily what most of the Haitian population would be expecting to see happen in terms of rebuilding their lives and the economy.
Well, Jonathan, maybe you could help us a little bit more on that one. The world responded so marvelously after this took place. It's distressing to hear so little of the money has got there, and then even more distressing to hear that there seems to be a disagreement about how it ought to be spent. Can you help us understand that better?
Well, we're right to say that the immediate influx of money went right to humanitarian projects and services to provide life-saving support to children and families. There's an experience now within the international aid community and humanitarian organizations for getting that aid directly to populations, and we've become progressively good at doing that. Where it becomes a lot more difficult is in the phase of trying to replan and trying to look at how to create jobs or stimulate the reform of social services, for example. That takes organization and coordination and strategies. And what we had coming last year from the donor conference was a general plan called the National Action Plan for Haiti's Reconstruction and Development. And what that should have translated into through the Commission were strategies that were shared in common between the government and foreign government donors and partners in civil society, so that we had common objectives for how to start doing the more recovery or longer term development work. The Commission has essentially tended to skip the step of creating strategies and focus instead on trying to line up projects behind some of those very broad priorities that came out of the national plan. And what you get there is, instead of a coordinated process and a strategy, a very piecemeal project. And so the funding, it becomes much harder to try and figure out where the funding should go, where it's going to make the maximum impact, because there are so many hands doing different types of projects. So the Commission really has to play a key role now in helping to inject that innovation and common coordination and planning around what's the best solution for education as a whole.
Let me get a sense from
reform Haiti's healthcare system.
Sorry, Jonathan.
And then lining projects up.
Let me get a sense from Kevin. When you were down there a couple of months ago, did you see evidence that money had been spent making, healthcare centers better or starting any kind of reconstruction, that type of thing?
In some of the camps on the outskirts of Port-au-Prince, I did see temporary shelters going up within the displaced people camp. And I didn't see much medical help. That was a huge concern of the people, because at that time the cholera outbreak was, well, it's still ongoing, but it was in full swing then. And people were complaining that they didn't have access to clean water, that organizations would come by and fill up water tanks within the community once a week. And these are communities with thousands of people, and they did not have access to water or sanitation. It was very fundamental things, the right basics to life that were not happening on the ground, and people were expressing frustration. We're walking down the streets. I literally saw people drinking out of stagnant water. When we approached them and asked them, why are you doing that? They said, I don't have any alternative. So I know that there's a gap between emergency relief and long-term sustainable relief. And I think right now, that's a middle ground where we have to try and figure out what to do, where to go next. Because a lot of the policies right now, I think they were focused on the immediate humanitarian relief. And more focus has to be put on how to create public services such as water, healthcare, and education that will serve the Haitian people for a long term to come.
Sure. Before we go there, Stephen, I know on your checklist that you started the program with, you mentioned the election. And I wonder if you could help us understand how, on top of everything we've talked about already, the lack of a clear victor in the first week and now the requirement for a runoff, how that is affecting the country's ability to put itself back together.
Sure. Steve, in March at the donors conference and before and since, there was a lot of reaffirmation of the principle of national ownership of reconstruction and development processes. The need for the government, the Haitian government, to be basically in command of the reconstruction process. The difficulty, that is a very, very important principle of international cooperation. The difficulty with that is that it requires a legitimate and capable government on the other side to assert its sovereignty, to plan, to chair coordination processes, to oversee implementation, to account, and so on and so on. The Preval government had basically lost its ability to do that, perhaps even before the earthquake, certainly due to its inability to respond immediately after the earthquake. It really lost its ability to play that leadership role. So an election was seen by all as being really, really crucial to reestablishing some kind of legitimate, more capable government with a mandate to actually at least play the role of an equal partner, if not leader, in reconstruction and longer-term development projects. The processes. Again, the crisis over the outcome of the first round of the election has delayed and complicated filling that essential core of the puzzle, if you will.
Understood. Okay, Laurent Dubois, let me get you to be the first to comment on this excerpt from Newsweek from a couple of months ago that I'm going to read now, which goes like this. Our government started giving all of its aid directly to NGOs, says Paul Farmer, UN Special Envoy to Haiti, and our policies influence those of other countries and international financial groups. As the most capable workers flock towards the new, comparatively high-paying NGO jobs, the Haitian public sector waned. Health and education went from bad to worse, and already rampant corruption grew and spread. Meanwhile, the nonprofits proliferated like mad. By the time the earthquake struck, Haiti already had more NGOs per capita than any other country in the world. Is it as simple to say, Laurent, that the NGOs, because of what Stephen just said, there's no real great functioning government in place, the NGOs are running the country?
Well, there's a certain amount of truth to that, and it's certainly, I think it's really important to take a step back and look at the configuration. I think a lot of people, obviously, doing good work with good intentions, and yet if you take the whole configuration, you realize there are just deep problems, and it's not really sustainable. I mean, the situation in which the government and multiple NGOs are working, and often without too much coordination, is something that, first of all, it's very expensive because there's a lot of multiplied effort, and also in the long term, I don't think it's possible for it to deliver what needs to be delivered. So there's certainly a real issue there. And if it's useful, I mean, a historian, so I'll say this, but it's useful to look in the longer term about how and why that's come about. Because again and again we see proposals put forward and ideas put forward that have in fact been tried before in Haiti. And there are larger structural and historical reasons why they aren't taking root. Alex mentioned earlier the need for plans that will go in, that line up with the aspirations of most Haitians. And while obviously many people are working in that direction, there's got to be a lot better sense of exactly what it is that Haitians aspire to, what it is that they're looking for, and to have the project line up with that, because otherwise we're not going to really move forward. So I do think that the earthquake has really just heightened a kind of broader crisis, as the excerpt suggests. And of course, it's a bit of a cycle in the sense that if money goes to the NGOs and it doesn't go to the state, then it's easier to then say that the state isn't doing anything, right? There's a way in which it's a bit of a catch-22 on both sides. Of course, the NGOs will say, well, the state isn't acting, so we need to act with urgent needs. And so both, I think everyone kind of has, in some ways, a correct argument, and yet if you look at it all as a larger situation, something really needs to change.
Well, I should ask the guy who is working with one of the NGOs whether he feels like he's running the country right now. Jonathan, what about it?
Well, I don't think there's any doubt that the government is making decisions, making the hard choices, and providing leadership at various levels. The Prime Minister himself is the co-chair of the Commission with Bill Clinton, and does exercise a lot of control and oversight and leadership. The point, however, is that until the fragile institutions, the public institutions of Haiti, are supported to be able to take on some direct roles in service delivery and job stimulation, there's going to be an international dependency. And the point now is to be able to use this window, which is not going to be around forever, of the Commission, of many partners and donors together with the government, to try and do something different, not to rebuild just what was there or the status quo, but to transform the situation there. And World Vision and many of our partners are fully committed to aligning and trying to support a lot of these sustainable and transformative developments, but there needs to be clear entry points within the Commission and in coordination bodies that should be closer to it to make this happen and to actually see a progressive agenda for change that we can all be sharing and supporting directly.
Okay, Alex Dupuy, let me get you to comment on something that Bill Clinton's chief of staff in his new life, not in his old life as president, pointed out, which was that, quote, international aid is too often project-based. It tends to focus on donor decisions, not long-term capacity building of the Haitian people. A, do you agree? And B, if you do, can that be turned around?
Well, I agree to some extent that they're built on short-term vision, but I think we need to go back to comments that were made before about the weakness or the incapacity of the Haitian state. That just did not happen overnight. This was the result of long-term, part of the long-term strategy, especially in the 80s and 90s, of the international community, in particular the World Bank, the IMF, the United States, and so on, through their free market, structural adjustment, neoliberal policies, whatever you want to call them, to actually defang the state. And much money in the 80s and 90s began to be channeled through NGOs that further sapped the capacity of the Haitian state to face up to its responsibilities and to address the fundamental needs of the population. And when you had a government that came to power in 1990, the first Aristide government, who put these issues on the agenda, that government was overthrown 7 months later, and from that point on, the policies of neoliberalism, of structural adjustment, were fostered on Haiti. And even President Clinton himself acknowledged in testimony to the Senate Foreign Relations Committee that the policies that he himself had fostered on Haiti had been devastating for the Haitian economy while they were helping U.S. farmers and U.S. businesses. So one has to look at the strategies that were put in place to, in fact, privatize even more the services that the state was meagerly providing before the earthquake. And now that its capacity is weakened even further, people are saying that the state is incapable. Well, the state is incapable partly because of very decided policies and in conjunction with the interests of the Haitian elites and those who ran the government to basically benefit themselves at the expense of the Haitian population. So unless we start rethinking the ways in which foreign policies and foreign aid has been targeted and the effects that they've had on Haiti, we're not going to get much beyond the sort of lackadaisical, step-by-step, ineffective progress that we're seeing in effect now.
Let me get Laurent Dubois to comment on that, because it is true that Bill Clinton did say that when he was president, his policies did good things for Arkansas farmers, but maybe not so didn't do so good by the Haitian agricultural sector. Now that he's saying that, all these years later, is that the kind of thing that an American administration would hear and change its policies accordingly to help Haiti?
Well, I mean, there is some questioning going on, and it lines up with broader questioning that's gone on about neoliberal policies more broadly. I think there's a fair amount of evidence that some of these have been very devastating in countries like Haiti and elsewhere. At the same time, I think it's one thing to raise those questions, and it's another to really push forward and change and fundamentally change the policies. Right now, I think the questions have been raised, but in many ways, what we see going forward are fairly similar kinds of projects about what's needed for Haiti. And really deep questions about exactly how one can sustain the kind of agricultural sector, maybe forms of decentralization, all kinds of deep questions about how a more sustainable change might be carried out. To my mind, anyway, I mean, they're being talked about, but I don't think they're being addressed head on in the way that they need to be. Because really, I think that it's an urgent for people to take stock of not just of the ways in which these policies have been detrimental in the past, but the way that in some ways, if they're reproduced now, we're just going to get more of the same, I think, in the longer term.
Kevin, while you were down there, did you get any sense about how power was shared and how decisions were made? You've got Bill Clinton on this interim commission. You've got a prime minister in Jean-Max Berive. How are, who's making the decisions? How are they sharing power?
Well, I would say largely it's been taken away from the Haitian people, and there was actually an incident on December 14th whereby the Haitian members of the Reconstruction Committee actually wrote a letter and presented it to Bill Clinton himself, stating that they were totally disconnected from any of the decision-making processes, and that even at some of the major meetings of the Reconstruction Committee in New York and the Dominican Republic, that they weren't even offered seats. So I think this is, come to show that sort of the Haitian people or the Haitian representatives have been sidelined in the Reconstruction process.
What did you think this was, a paternalistic view? We can handle this, you guys aren't savvy enough to figure this out?
Well, I think that's sort of been the case with Haiti, as we've said on the program for about the past, well, at least the past 30 years. It's going back a lot further than that. When it comes to liberalization or neoliberal policies in Haiti, determining what kind of government is suitable for the people of Haiti. And the very fact that Bill Clinton, the person responsible for undermining the Haitian agricultural industry, is in charge of reconstruction, and it's a reconstruction plan that is totally vacant of any way to rebuild agriculture in Haiti. If you look at it, it's left off of the map. And that's something that would really reintegrate Haitians back into rural communities, provide jobs, increase food security, and increase their self-sufficiency. So it's really troubling to see that the decisions are not being made in the interests of, the Haitian people.
Stephen Barani, you want to follow up on that?
Yeah, I'm very glad that others raised this. Agriculture is absolutely crucial to understanding both the weakness of the state and possibilities for the future and the politics of Reconstruction. The action plan for the reconstruction of Haiti, approved by the government, by the international community in March of last year, actually contains a chapter on revitalizing rural areas. It's linked to decentralization, and it's linked to the revitalization, in fact, transformation of agricultural production for domestic consumption to address the food security crisis in Haiti, as well as for export. And there's a lot of potential probably in both areas. One of the difficulties, though, is that aside from the Inter-American Development Bank, I certainly haven't seen any evidence over the past year of major donors actually putting some money on the table to fund major initiatives in this area. I know that in Canada, for example, Canada is, after all, a fairly large bilateral donor to Haiti. And food security is supposed to be a priority for our development agency. And yet again, no evidence that this is emerging as a priority in Canadian programming in Haiti. A lot of humanitarian assistance is important, a very large component of assistance to police reform and other security agency. That might be important, but if that isn't followed up with investments in the revitalization of agriculture, especially for domestic consumption and livelihoods in rural areas, then I agree with others who have said that will make it very difficult to rebuild Haiti better.
Alex, I saw you nodding your head on that one. You concur?
Absolutely. This has been part of the problem. That is, back to the IHRC, it was mentioned that the foreign members of the commission make the key decisions, and that's the case because they're the ones who control the money. And the Haitian side has been marginalized. But more importantly, when the IHRC was being put together and the action plan for the reconstruction of Haiti was being developed, the Haitian civil society organizations, who had very different ideas of what the priorities ought to be, were completely ignored. That is, their voices were silenced; they were not heard. So basically what we have in the reconstruction plan, despite its lofty language, is basically a replication of the same policies that have failed for the past decades that they're trying to reproduce. This goes back to the World Bank policies in the 70s to transform Haiti into a supplier of cheap labor for the assembly or the garment industry, and the agricultural policies that called for removing tariffs and other exemptions against agricultural import that resulted precisely in the fact that Haiti, which in the 80s was producing 80% of its food, now only produces at best 42%, and most of the rest is imported from the United States. So when you have these kinds of policies that have proven to have failed in the past, these are exactly the same strategies, the same policies that are being envisioned now. It's no wonder that there is very little progress being made, because the basic fundamental interests of the Haitian population for access to decent health care, to jobs, to housing, to education, and so forth, are not being systematically addressed, because those are not the kinds of investments that are profitable for foreign investors or for foreign donors.
Okay, having said all that, our American friends would not have seen this, but perhaps our Canadian friends will have. This past weekend, the Globe and Mail, which is Canada's national newspaper, did a feature on a Jacmel businessman named Joel Colley, who's had a very successful year. He's provided everything from oil and gas and trucks and water and construction materials, and he has a very rather negative view of his fellow Haitians, who he says they are too passive to risk competing with him and too vengeful towards his success to work alongside him. So let me get into some discussion about this. Laurent, is it possible that Haitians are, in some respects, their own, their own worst enemies when it comes to trying to put this country back on its own feet?
Well, I obviously think it's important to be pretty cautious in making generalizations about a whole population. The population is, of course, diverse, and there's enormous differences in how people approach things. It's a population. In general, I think Haiti is a population that has incredible entrepreneurship, a sense of wanting to reconstruct, and that's something I think anyone who goes there will have seen, and will have seen people trying to doing the best with what they have. So I think it's a bit too easy to sort of see the culture as a problem. Now, obviously, there are sort of political habits, or there are structural situations. There's all kinds of things that make it difficult, and there's people have adapted to a situation that's been very, very difficult for decades in certain kinds of ways. So there's certainly that may be the case, but I do think if you address the broader questions, those things will change. But my sense is that generally the kind of that's a kind of easy out, when in fact what really needs to be addressed is a much larger configuration of issues.
No, I hear you.
And going back in a sorry, go ahead.
I was just going to say, I hear what you're saying, but you've touched on something that whenever we talk about Haiti on this program, and I'm sure elsewhere as well, the notion of the Haitian culture as part of the problem here, I think is something we've got to spend a few minutes on here. And Kevin, did you see evidence of this, Kevin, while you were down there?
The biggest thing that I saw in Haiti is they were taking their destiny in their own hands. They were trying to start small businesses. They were establishing community groups to look after themselves, where, to fill the gaps that NGOs and the United Nations couldn't do. These were Haitian grassroots organizations that were looking out for each other. They were operating with hardly any funding. And they were really doing what a lot of organizations are failing to do in the camps, because they go and operate where there are security concerns. They operate with where the population has been marginalized. And I think that that's very important, because when you take that away from the Haitian people, they're sort of just looked at as helpless victims. And the reality is that, the situation on the ground in Haiti, by and large, has been engineered by, the large donor countries, the policies of the United States, our own government, and helping to overthrow Jean-Bertrand Aristide in 2004, in addition to policies by the World Bank. So I think you have to look at it within a wider historical context.
Okay, let me pick up on that. I think that's an interesting idea. And Jonathan, I'll go to you first on this one. I read something in preparing for this program that I found quite astonishing, which is that when countries, generally speaking, have their act together, it doesn't matter what disasters take place. In the long run, the growth rates remain the same, the progress rates remain the same. This study took a look at Germany, and despite 2 world wars and 1 massive depression in the 1920s, the country is still, if you look at it through a 150 or 200-year lens, the country is basically on track to be, in terms of its economic fundamentals today, where it was on track to be a century ago. I wonder what the impact, long range, of this earthquake will be on Haiti. Jonathan, why don't you start with that, and we'll get everybody around the horn on this one.
Well, I think, Steve, what you're speaking to really is about the resilience of various institutions and the Haitian population as well.
But Haiti doesn't have those institutions, those resilient institutions, which is why I asked the question.
That's right. What we have seen in the last 3 decades is that Haitian communities, however, do have that resilience, and as others have said, do have hopes and dreams for the future, especially young people that want to see themselves become doctors or lawyers, etc. So the important part now is, how does one build those institutions? What is the critical path moving forward on that? And just to go back to an earlier comment that you cited, I think, from Bill Clinton, which was that the response is too project-based. We can do a lot of responses at the grassroots level, working directly with Haitians themselves and various communities, but there will always remain a sort of glass ceiling on those grassroots projects unless there's more meaningful reforms being done of these institutions.
Okay, forgive me for jumping in here, but we've just got a few minutes left, and I want to make sure everybody gets a chance on this. Alex Dupuy, on the issue of whether or not the institutions can ensure a brighter future for Haiti, what would you say?
They need to be rebuilt from the ground up, in my view, because what there is in Haiti is basically a chasm between the tiny elite like Mr. Kaoli, who for Haiti's most of Haiti's history have benefited by exploiting the population, and in partnership with the Haitian government, deprived the Haitian population of opportunities, of their basic fundamental rights, of addressing the needs of the population, and now they're blaming that same population for the problems of the country. It's very easy for the elite to place the blame on the lower classes, on the majority, when they themselves have done very little to, in fact, develop the economy and provide opportunities for the majority.
Okay, Stephen Barani, let me get you in here.
Sure. without being, getting into the blame game too much, I think that another actor that is really important in this regard, another Haitian actor, and I do, by the way, think that it's really important to look at the interaction between international actors and forces and national actors in shaping responses to natural catastrophes, as well as, shaping development prospects more broadly. And Haiti's no exception to that general rule. And in Haiti, I think another actor that's been really crucial is the political part of the elite, or the dominant class, whatever you want to call it. And here, the irresponsibility of the current governing party, if you want to call it that, in the way it handled the first round of the election has been really a critical barrier to, again, helping the country get back on its feet and assert itself, become a full partner with the international community, and so on. So one only hopes that they will actually play their cards very differently in the second round when it goes ahead.
Laurent Dubois on the same issue?
Yes, I mean, I think the fundamental question in Haitian history for a long time has been that there's been incredible potential. There's been a very strong democratic society, civil society, all kinds of potential on the ground that hasn't been transformed into long-term construction of institutions. And it's not for lack of attempts by different moments at different actors at different times. So the question is how to make those come together. That's why I think the question of culture is so vital, in a sense. If you realize that the culture, in fact, has a very strong democratic push, a very long history of a sense of the need for democracy and equality and dignity, and to use that and cultivate that. But the problem is, for the time being, the institutions are not really hooking up with that intense need and desire. So some kind of resolution needs to be found. And for the time being, I don't really see the institutions going in that direction. So that's the problem at this point.
Kevin, in our last minute here, do you have plans to go back?
Yes, I do.
When are you going back?
I hope to go back this summer.
Do you suspect that if you go back next summer, it will look any different down there than when you were there last November?
Unfortunately, I wouldn't be surprised if it was the same, because the actors, both nationally and internationally, they seem to be trying to reinforce the same failed policies. And we have to realize that NGOs cannot take the place of the state. And when the Haitian people have tried to voice their opinion to get a progressive democracy in place, it was undermined both times. It faced aid embargoes, which undermined their ability to build state institutions that you mentioned. And also, a telling example was that actually the first Haitian free medical school, which was built under Aristide's second administration, was closed down a month after its opening in February 2004, and was occupied by US Marines and later the United Nations. And that school would have trained 600 Haitian doctors in the first 12 years of its operation. So I think that's, a tragic example.
Real missed opportunity there, wasn't it? Okay. Be safe when you go back down next summer. Thank you so much. Let me thank all our guests, in fact, for coming on the program tonight. Laurent Dubois from Duke University, Alex Dupuy from Wesleyan University, Jonathan Papoulidis, World Vision out of New York City, Stephen Barani from University of Ottawa, and here Kevin Edmonds, McMaster University and Toronto Haiti Action Committee. Good of all of you to be on the program tonight, and we thank you for your expertise on this issue.